The bite of autumn wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke through the open window as Rose Adams stared at her husband's retreating form, his parting words still stinging her ears like the lash of a whip. "Call that a meal. My ma's hogs eat better than this." The screen door slammed behind him, the sound echoing through their modest home on the edge of Georgetown, Colorado, a bustling mining town nestled in the rugged embrace of the Rocky Mountains in 1876. Rose stood motionless in the kitchen, her slender fingers clutching the edge of the worn wooden table for support. At 22, she had already endured 3 years of marriage to Emmett Adams, a man whose charming courtship had dissolved into bitter disappointment and cruel words once the wedding band was secure on her finger. She glanced down at the dinner. She had prepared a rabbit stew with the last of their summer vegetables. She had risen before dawn to tend to her garden, gathered herbs from the hillside, and spent hours over the hot stove, attempting to create something savory from their meager provisions. Yet Emmett had taken one bite, spit it onto his plate, and launched into a tirade about her worthlessness as a wife. Rose pushed a strand of auburn hair from her face and blinked back tears. She refused to cry, not anymore. The first year of their marriage, she had shed enough tears to fill Clear Creek. Now, she felt only a hollow ache where her heart should be. Georgetown was booming with silver mining prosperity, but little of that wealth found its way to the Adams household. Emmett worked at the terrible mine, bringing home just enough pay to keep them fed when he didn't drink it away at Miner's Rest Saloon first. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the window. A stranger rode toward their cabin, his tall form silhouetted against the setting sun. Rose quickly wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, curious and cautious. Visitors were rare this far from town. "Evening, madam," the man called as he approached. He tipped his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, yet handsome with clear blue eyes that crinkled at the corners. He couldn't have been more than 30. "Name's Owen Ingram. I was told in town this might be a place to get a hot meal for a fair price." Rose hesitated. Some of the women in town took in boarders or fed travelers to supplement their husbands' incomes, but Emmett had always forbidden it, claiming he wouldn't have strangers under his roof. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed, Mr. Ingram," she said, unconsciously straightening her posture. "We don't take in guests here." The cowboy, for he was clearly that, from his worn leather chaps to his trailed, dusty boots, dismounted with fluid grace. "That's a shame. I've been riding since dawn, and that smell coming from your kitchen is just about the most heavenly thing I've encountered in weeks." Rose flushed, surprised by the compliment. "It's only rabbit stew." "Only rabbit stew." Owen Ingram's smile was warm, genuine. "Madam, after trail rations and my own sorry attempts at cooking, rabbit stew sounds like a feast fit for President Hayes himself." Something inside Rose softened at his sincerity. Emmett would be at the saloon for hours he never returned before midnight on payday. "I suppose I could spare a bowl," she heard herself saying. "For a fair price, as you said. You won't regret it, Mrs. Adams, Rose Adams, Mrs. Adams," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "I'm much obliged." As Rose ladled the stew into a bowl for her unexpected guest, she felt a strange fluttering in her chest, nervousness, certainly, at having a stranger in her home, but something else too. Something she hadn't felt in a long time, pride in her work, in the meal she had created with her own hands. Owen Ingram sat at her table with his hat respectfully placed beside him. He took his first spoonful of stew and closed his eyes, savoring it. "Mrs. Adams," he said finally, looking at her with something akin to reverence, "this is the best meal I've ever had." The simple words, spoken with such genuine appreciation, washed over Rose like a balm. She turned away quickly to hide the tears that sprang to her eyes, busying herself at the stove. "You're too kind, Mr. Ingram," she managed. "Not kind, just honest." He continued eating with evident enjoyment. A man who can't appreciate cooking like this doesn't deserve to eat it. Rose stiffened slightly, wondering if he had somehow overheard Emmett's parting words. But no, that was impossible. She served herself a small bowl and sat across from him, curious about this stranger who had appeared on her doorstep at precisely the moment she needed to hear a kind word. "What brings you to Georgetown, Mr. Ingram?" she asked, finding it surprisingly easy to talk to him. "Cattle drive," he replied. "Delivered a herd to the railhead in Denver, then decided to see a bit of the mountains before heading back to Wyoming territory. I've got a small spread there, nothing grand, but it's mine." There was quiet pride in his voice. "And please call me Owen." "Wyoming must be beautiful," Rose said, allowing herself to imagine somewhere else, somewhere far from this cabin and the life that had become her prison. "It has its charms," Owen agreed. "Wide open spaces that make a man feel free. Good grazing land. Though I'll admit it gets mighty lonely, especially in winter." Their conversation flowed easily as they ate, Owen telling her of his life on the range, Rose sharing stories of her childhood in Missouri before her family had moved west. She found herself laughing for the first time in months at his tale of a particularly stubborn mule that had once stolen and hidden his only pair of boots. As the meal concluded, Owen insisted on paying her twice what she asked, saying the food and company were worth every cent. When he stood to leave, Rose felt an unexpected pang of regret. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Adams," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "If you don't mind, I might stop by tomorrow before I continue my journey. I'd gladly pay for another meal as fine as this one." Before Rose could answer, the door crashed open. Emmett stood in the doorway, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. His bloodshot eyes took in the scene before him, the stranger standing in his kitchen, the two empty bowls on the table, his wife looking more animated than he'd seen her in months. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, stepping into the room with menacing purpose. At 26, Emmett Adams was still handsome despite his dissipation, with dark hair and the build of a man who worked with his hands. But the charm that had once made Rose's heart flutter was gone, replaced by a perpetual sneer. "This gentleman was just leaving," Rose said quickly, her voice suddenly small. "He paid for a meal, paid for a meal. Since when do we run a damn restaurant?" Emmett's gaze fixed on Owen, who stood calmly, assessing the situation. "And who are you to come into my house and eat at my table?" "Owen Ingram," came the level reply. "I apologize for any misunderstanding. Your wife provides an excellent meal, sir. You're a fortunate man." Emmett's laugh was ugly. "Fortunate? To eat her slop? You must be starving indeed if you think her cooking's worth anything." Rose flinched as if struck, but Owen's expression remained unchanged except for a slight hardening around his eyes. "I've eaten in fine establishments from St. Louis to San Francisco," Owen said quietly. "And I meant what I said. Perhaps your palate is not refined enough to appreciate good cooking when you taste it." The room went deadly still. Emmett's hands curled into fists. "Get out of my house," he growled. "Now." Owen nodded once, turned to Rose and tipped his hat. "Mrs. Adams, thank you again." There was something in his eyes, concern perhaps, or a silent message she couldn't quite interpret. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Emmett's heavy breathing. Rose began clearing the table, her movements quick and efficient, hoping to diffuse his anger with normalcy. "So this is what you do when I'm gone." Emmett's voice was deceptively quiet. "Entertain strange men." He was just a traveler looking for a meal, Rose said, keeping her tone neutral. I earned us $2. $2, Emmett snorted. And what else did you earn with him, wife? The accusation stung worse than his earlier insults. Nothing happened, Emmett. He ate, he paid, he was leaving. That's all. Emmett crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. Don't lie to me. I saw the way he looked at you, the way you were smiling at him. Rose tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. You're hurting me, she gasped. You want to know what hurting is? Emmett's face was inches from hers, his breath hot and sour with whiskey. Try coming home to find your wife making eyes at another man. I wasn't. The slap came without warning, the force of it snapping her head to the side. Rose's cheek burned, but she refused to cry out. She'd endured worse from him before. Don't you ever disrespect me like that again, Emmett hissed, finally releasing her arm. No more visitors. No more meals for strangers. You belong to me, and don't you forget it. He stalked off to their bedroom, leaving Rose trembling in the kitchen. She touched her cheek gingerly, knowing it would bruise by morning. Slowly, she finished cleaning up, her mind replaying Owen Ingram's words. This is the best meal I've ever had. Such a simple statement, yet it had awakened something inside her, a flicker of self-worth, a reminder that she was more than Emmett's punching bag and verbal target. That spark of dignity was dangerous. It made her question why she stayed, why she endured. As Rose prepared for bed, laying a blanket on the floor beside their bed since Emmett had passed out across the mattress, she found herself wondering if Owen Ingram would indeed return tomorrow, and what she would do if he did. Morning brought no relief from the tension. Rose arose early, her body stiff from the hard floor, and began her chores. Emmett was still unconscious, his snores rattling through the small cabin. Her cheek throbbed where he had struck her, and when she checked her reflection in the small mirror above the washbasin, she saw the skin had purpled overnight. She went about her morning routine mechanically, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, drawing water from the well. The leaves on the aspen trees had turned golden, heralding the approach of winter. Soon the mountain passes would become treacherous with snow, isolating Georgetown further from the outside world. When Emmett finally emerged from the bedroom, his face was etched with the misery of his hangover, but his eyes still flashed with anger when they fell on Rose. Make yourself useful and fix me something to eat, he ordered, slumping at the table. Rose silently prepared cornmeal mush, setting it before him without meeting his gaze. He ate without comment, then pushed back from the table. I'm heading to the mine, he announced. Should be home by sunset. I expect dinner on the table and no more unwelcome guests. Understand? Yes, Emmett, Rose replied, keeping her voice even. After he left, she allowed herself a moment of relief. The day stretched before her, hours without his looming presence, his cruel words, his unpredictable temper. She touched her bruised cheek absently as she considered what to prepare for the evening meal. Just after midday, as Rose was hanging laundry to dry in the crisp mountain air, she spotted a familiar figure on horseback approaching the cabin. Her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Owen Ingram had returned, just as he'd said he might. She hurried to meet him before he reached the cabin, waving him to stop at a distance. Mr. Ingram, she called, conscious of her bruised face. You shouldn't be here. Owen reined his horse to a halt, his expression darkening as he noticed her injury. Mrs. Adams, he said, dismounting swiftly. What happened to your face? Rose turned away, embarrassed. It's nothing. An accident. That's no accident, Owen said gently, stepping closer but careful not to crowd her. Did he do that to you? Your husband? The direct question caught her off guard. In Georgetown, people pretended not to notice such things. Women with bruises were said to be clumsy or accident-prone, never victims of their husband's rage. "Please, Mr. Ingram," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to go. Emmett will be furious if he finds you here again." "I'm not afraid of Emmett Adams," Owen stated simply. "But I am concerned for you, Mrs. Adams." Rose finally looked up at him, struck by the sincerity in his blue eyes. "Why, you don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're kind enough to feed a stranger. I know you cook like an angel. And I know no woman deserves to be treated the way you were last night." His words touched something deep within her, but Rose shook her head. "That's just how marriage is sometimes," she said, repeating what she'd been told by other women in town when she'd once dared to complain about Emmett's treatment. "Men have their ways." "No, Mrs. Adams," Owen said firmly. "That's not how marriage should be, not ever." Rose felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "What do you want, Mr. Ingram?" "I came to apologize for causing you trouble," he said, "and to make sure you were all right. Clearly you're not." "I'm fine," she insisted, though they both knew it was a lie, "but you really must go. Emmett won't be back until sunset, but if anyone sees you here and tells him." Owen studied her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll go," he agreed, "but I'll be in Georgetown for a few more days, staying at the boarding house in town. If you need anything at all, you send word to me there." "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Ingram, but—" "Owen," he corrected gently. "And it's not just concern, Rose, it's—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Sometimes a person comes into your life unexpectedly, and you just know they matter. I can't explain it better than that." Rose felt herself flush, moved by his words yet frightened by their implications. "You should go," she repeated, unable to address what he'd just confessed. Owen nodded, his expression somber. "Take care of yourself, Rose Adams," he said, mounting his horse again. "You deserve so much more than this." She watched him ride away, his words echoing in her mind. "You deserve so much more than this." No one had ever suggested such a thing to her before. The women of Georgetown accepted their lot in life, whatever it might be. The lucky ones had kind husbands, the rest endured. Rose returned to her laundry, her thoughts in turmoil. For the first time since her wedding day, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she wasn't afraid, where her efforts were appreciated, where she might even find happiness. The rest of the day passed slowly as Rose prepared a beef and potato stew for dinner, using the last of their meat. As she worked, she found herself putting extra care into the meal, seasoning it precisely, letting it simmer to perfection. If Owen Ingram thought her cooking worthy of praise, perhaps it truly was. Perhaps Emmett's constant criticism was just another form of his cruelty. Emmett returned as the sun was setting, his clothes and face dirty from his day in the mine. He grunted acknowledgment as he washed up, then sat at the table, eyeing the stew suspiciously. "Smells decent enough," he admitted grudgingly, serving himself a generous portion. Rose took this as high praise from him and allowed herself a small smile as she sat across from him with her own modest serving. They ate in silence until Emmett spoke again. "Saw your cowboy friend in town today," he said casually, though his eyes were sharp on her face. Rose nearly choked on her stew. "He's not my friend," she said quickly. "No. Then why was he asking about you at the general store?" A chill ran down Rose's spine. "I don't know what you mean." Emmett set down his spoon with deliberate calm. "Mrs. Peterson told me he was inquiring after the lovely Mrs. Adams with the auburn hair. Said he was concerned about her well-being." Rose's mouth went dry. Martha Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, was the town's most notorious gossip. If she'd overheard Owen asking about Rose, half of Georgetown would know by now. "I haven't seen him since yesterday," Rose said truthfully. She decided against mentioning his brief visit earlier that day. Emmett was volatile enough without additional provocation. "You better not be lying to me, Rose," Emmett warned, his voice low. "I won't be made a fool of in my own town." "I'm not lying," Rose insisted, meeting his gaze steadily. "And I have no interest in Mr. Ingram or any other man. I'm your wife, Emmett." He studied her face, looking for deception, then seemed satisfied. "Good," he said, returning to his meal. After several bites, he added, "This stew isn't half bad tonight. Maybe you're finally learning to cook proper." The backhanded compliment stung more than it should have. Rose thought of Owen's enthusiastic praise and felt a surge of resentment toward Emmett. Still, she nodded acknowledgement, knowing better than to challenge him. After dinner, Emmett announced he was going back to the saloon. "The boys are having a poker game," he explained, already reaching for his coat. "Don't wait up." Rose watched him leave with mixed emotions, relief at having the house to herself, worry about how much of their money he would gamble away, and a nagging sense of something else, something that felt dangerously like opportunity. Once she was certain Emmett was gone, Rose took a lantern and went to the small root cellar behind their cabin. Among the preserves and winter provisions, she kept a tin box with her personal treasures, a locket containing a lock of her mother's hair, a letter from her brother who'd moved to California, and $27 she had painstakingly saved over 3 years of marriage. The money came from eggs she sold to neighbors, from the occasional mending she did for women in town, and from the few coins Emmett sometimes forgot in his pockets when he was too drunk to remember them. It wasn't much, but it represented freedom, or at least the possibility of it. Rose had never seriously considered leaving Emmett before. Despite everything, she had made vows before God and believed in honoring them. But as she sat in the dim light of the cellar, her face throbbing from his hand, she wondered if God truly meant for women to endure such suffering in the name of matrimony. She carefully returned the box to its hiding place and went back to the cabin, her mind racing with dangerous thoughts. Owen Ingram would be leaving Georgetown soon, returning to his ranch in Wyoming. The image of wide open spaces of land stretching to the horizon tugged at something within her, but running away with a man she barely knew, it was madness. Even if she could trust his intentions, and she wasn't certain she could, such an action would brand her as an adulteress. She would be shunned by decent society, unable to ever return to her family or friends. No, Rose decided as she prepared for bed. She couldn't run away with Owen Ingram. But for the first time, she seriously considered running away from Emmett, with or without anyone's help. Morning brought clarity and caution. In the harsh light of day, Rose's midnight contemplations seemed reckless and foolhardy. Where would she go? How would she survive? A woman alone faced dangers perhaps even worse than an abusive husband. She went about her morning chores methodically, trying to push thoughts of escape from her mind. Emmett had returned late and was still sleeping off his night of drinking and gambling. Rose was grateful for the reprieve. Her bruised cheek was more noticeable today, the purple deepening to an ugly blue-black. Around noon, she headed into town for supplies. Georgetown bustled with activity, miners coming off shift, shopkeepers hawking wares, ladies in fine dresses promenading along the wooden sidewalks. Rose kept her head down, a shawl pulled partially over her face to hide her bruise. "At the general store, Mrs." Peterson eyed her with barely concealed curiosity as Rose selected flour, sugar, and coffee beans. "That cowboy was in again this morning," the older woman said, measuring out the flour. "The handsome one with the blue eyes. Asked if I'd seen you." Rose concentrated on counting out coins for her purchases. "Did he? Hum. Mrs. Peterson continued, obviously enjoying herself. Said he was leaving tomorrow and wanted to say goodbye. Seemed mighty concerned about you. Said if I saw you, to tell you he'd be at the creek bend past Miller's Meadow at sunset tonight. Said you'd know the place. Rose froze. She did know it, a secluded spot about a half-mile from her cabin, where Clear Creek widened and formed a small pool before continuing down the mountain. She had gone there occasionally to wash laundry in the summer months. "Thank you for telling me," she said carefully, aware of Mrs. Peterson's avid gaze. "Though I'm sure Mr. Ingram was just being polite. We barely know each other." Mrs. Peterson's arched eyebrow spoke volumes. "Well, he certainly seemed to think you might want to meet him, but I'm sure a respectable married woman like yourself wouldn't consider such a thing." "Of course not," Rose agreed, gathering her purchases. "Good day, Mrs. Peterson." As she left the store, Rose's heart raced. Owen wanted to see her before he left. The proper thing would be to ignore the message, to let him leave Georgetown without another word between them. But the thought of never seeing him again created an ache in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. She spent the afternoon in a state of nervous indecision, jumping at every sound, terrified that Emmett might somehow discover Owen's message. But Emmett remained unconscious until late afternoon, when he finally stumbled from the bedroom, ill-tempered and demanding food. Rose placed bread and cold meat before him, then announced she needed to gather herbs from the hillside before sunset. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did often collect wild herbs for cooking and home remedies. "Don't be gone long," Emmett growled, tearing into the bread. "I'm heading back to the saloon later. Gotta win back what I lost last night." Rose nodded, knowing this meant he would likely gamble away what remained of his pay. She gathered her shawl and a small basket, then set out toward the creek, telling herself she was merely going to inform Owen that she couldn't possibly leave with him, that she appreciated his concern but had made her vows for better or worse. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines as Rose approached the creek bend. The aspens along the water shimmered gold and orange, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Owen was already there, seated on a fallen log, his horse grazing nearby. He stood as she approached, his face lighting with a smile that transformed his features. "You came," he said simply, as if her appearance was both surprising and inevitable. "I shouldn't be here," Rose replied, stopping several paces from him. "Mrs. Peterson has probably already told half the town about your message." Owen's smile faded. "I'm sorry for that. I didn't think. I just needed to see you once more before I left." "Why?" Rose asked, the question that had been burning inside her all day. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "I'm nothing to you." "That's not true," Owen said, taking a step toward her. "I don't understand it myself, Rose. I've known you for barely 2 days, but I can't bear the thought of leaving you here with that man." His eyes darkened as they took in her bruise. "He did that to you because of me, didn't he?" Rose touched her cheek reflexively. "It doesn't matter, he's my husband." "It matters to me," Owen insisted. "Rose, come with me to Wyoming. I have a good ranch, small but growing. You'd be safe there. You could cook your wonderful meals without fear of being struck for your efforts. You could." "Be what?" Rose interrupted. "Your mistress, your cook. What exactly are you offering me, Mr. Ingram?" Owen looked taken aback. I haven't thought it all through," he admitted. "I just know I want to protect you, to give you the life you deserve." "You can't protect me," Rose said softly. "No one can. This is the life I chose when I married Emmett." "Did you choose to be beaten?" Owen challenged. "Did you choose to live in fear?" "Because that's not what marriage should be, Rose. It should be partnership, respect, maybe even love." The word love hung in the air between them. Rose felt her resolve weakening under the intensity of Owen's gaze. Could she really leave everything behind: her home, her possessions, her identity as a respectable married woman? "I have $27, she said suddenly, surprising herself. "Is that enough to get to Wyoming?" Hope blazed in Owen's eyes. "More than enough," he assured her. "I can cover any additional expenses." "Rose, are you saying you'll come with me?" Was she? Rose hesitated on the precipice of the most momentous decision of her life. "I need to be clear about what this means," she said carefully. "I'm still married in the eyes of God and the law. I won't." "I'm not asking for anything improper," Owen said quickly. "You'd have your own cabin on my property. You'd be safe, with time to decide what you want for your future. If that future includes me someday after you're legally free of Adams, well." He cleared his throat. "I'd consider myself the luckiest man alive, but that would be your choice in your time." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Rose. Here was a man offering her not demands or ownership, but choice, something Emmett had stripped from her long ago. "When would we leave?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the babbling creek. "Tomorrow at first light," Owen replied. "I've already settled my business in town. We could be well on our way before anyone realizes you're gone." Rose closed her eyes, imagining it riding away from Georgetown, from Emmett's cruelty, toward something unknown but full of possibility. When she opened them again, her decision was made. "I'll meet you here before dawn," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'll need tonight to gather my things without arousing Emmett's suspicion." Owen's smile was radiant. "I'll be waiting," he promised. "Rose, you won't regret this, I swear it." "I hope not," she said, already turning to head back to the cabin. "Because once I leave with you, there's no coming back." "I understand," Owen said solemnly. "I won't let you down." Rose nodded once, then hurried away, her heart pounding with equal measures of fear and exhilaration. She was going to leave her husband. She was going to flee with a man she barely knew to a place she'd never seen. It was madness, yet it felt more right than anything had in years. When she returned to the cabin, Emmett was gone as expected. Rose moved quickly, gathering only essentials: her warmest clothes, a few keepsakes, her mother's old Bible. She wrapped everything in a bundle with her quilt, then hid it beneath the porch where Emmett wouldn't notice it missing. Finally, she retrieved her precious tin box from the root cellar. The $27 represented countless small sacrifices, pennies saved when she might have bought a ribbon or a bit of sugar. Now it would buy her freedom. That night, as she prepared dinner and waited for Emmett's return, Rose felt strangely calm. She had crossed an invisible line. There was no turning back. When Emmett eventually stumbled in, reeking of whiskey and tobacco, she served him dutifully and endured his drunken monologue about cheating card players and the declining quality of ore in the mine. "You're awful quiet tonight," he observed as she cleared the dishes. "What's eating at you?" "Nothing," Rose replied, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I suppose." Emmett grunted, his attention already shifting to the bottle of whiskey he'd brought home. "Well, don't go to bed yet." "I'm feeling amorous tonight." His bloodshot eyes roved over her figure with proprietorial lust. Rose's stomach clenched, but she nodded meekly. This would be the last time, she reminded herself. By this time tomorrow, she would be miles away, heading toward a new life. Later, after Emmett had taken his husbandly rights with the same rough disregard he showed in all aspects of their marriage, Rose lay awake beside his snoring form, counting the hours until dawn. She thought of Owen waiting by the creek, of the journey ahead, of all she was leaving behind. There would be consequences, she knew. Emmett would be furious when he discovered her gone. He might pursue her, might even try to force her return. But Wyoming was far, and Emmett was not a man to abandon his job and drinking companions for long. With luck, distance and time would dissolve their connection, if not the legal bond between them. As the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky, Rose slipped from bed. She dressed quickly in her warmest clothes, added a few final items to her bundle, and took one last look around the cabin that had been her home and her prison. Then she stepped out into the pre-dawn chill, retrieved her bundle from beneath the porch, and set off toward the creek bend and Owen Ingram. He was waiting as promised, 2 horses saddled and ready. He helped secure her bundle behind the saddle of the gentle mare he'd acquired for her, then assisted her in mounting. "Ready?" he asked, his face solemn in the dim light. Rose took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. "Yes," she said, surprised by the strength in her voice. "I'm ready." They rode out as the first rays of sun gilded the mountain peaks, following a trail that would take them down from the high country toward the plains, and eventually to Wyoming. Rose didn't look back at Georgetown, keeping her eyes fixed on the path ahead and the man who rode beside her. They traveled steadily through the morning, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and biscuits Owen had packed. Rose found riding more tiring than she'd anticipated. It had been years since she'd been on horseback, and the side saddle position required muscles she had long neglected. "We'll stop early tonight," Owen promised, noticing her discomfort. "There's a way station about 10 miles ahead. We can get a proper meal and beds for the night." "Won't they ask questions?" Rose worried. "About a woman traveling with a man who's not her husband." Owen's expression was reassuring. "I'll say you're my sister, traveling to join her husband in Cheyenne. No one will think twice about it." The lie made Rose uncomfortable, but she understood its necessity. They were, in the eyes of society and the law, doing something scandalous, even criminal. Emmett could have Owen arrested for abducting his wife if he chose to pursue them. They reached the way station, little more than a large cabin with a stable attached, just as the sun was beginning its descent. The proprietor, a grizzled man named Jenkins, accepted their story without question, showing them to 2 small adjoining rooms at the back of the establishment. Over a dinner of venison stew, which, Rose noted with pride, was not as flavorful as her own would have been, Owen explained their planned route to Wyoming. "We'll follow the old Cherokee Trail north," he said, tracing the path on a well-worn map. "It'll take us about 2 weeks, depending on weather and how well you adapt to riding. My ranch is here, near the Medicine Bow Mountains." He pointed to a spot that looked impossibly far away to Rose. "What's it like?" she asked, trying to picture the place that might become her home. Owen's face softened with evident love for his land. "Beautiful. Rolling hills, good grass for the cattle, a creek running through it that never runs dry, even in the hottest summer. The cabin's not much, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but I've been meaning to expand it." He looked slightly embarrassed. "It's a lonely life for a woman, I won't pretend otherwise. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. The closest town, Laramie, is a good day's ride." "I don't mind solitude," Rose said truthfully. After years of fearing Emmett's moods and temper, the thought of quiet days in a remote cabin seemed like paradise. "Spring and fall, I'm often away with the cattle," Owen continued. "But winter and summer, I'm home most days." He hesitated. "Rose, I want you to understand what you're getting into. Ranch life is hard, especially for a woman used to town living." Rose straightened her shoulders. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Ingram." "Owen," he corrected gently. "If we're traveling together all this way, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Owen," Rose agreed, tasting the name on her tongue. It felt intimate, this simple use of his given name, perhaps more intimate than the fact that they were fleeing together across state lines. That night, In the narrow bed of her small room, Rose lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the way station, travelers talking in the common room, horses nickering in the stable, the wind whistling through the eaves. Just beyond the thin wall, Owen slept in his own room. The proximity was both comforting and disconcerting. Rose wondered if Emmett had discovered her absence yet. Had he raged through their cabin, smashing dishes and furniture in his fury? Had he alerted the sheriff, claiming his wife had been kidnapped? Or had he simply cursed her name and sought solace in a whiskey bottle? Whatever his reaction, it was too late for regrets. Rose had made her choice, had taken her first steps toward a different life. As sleep finally claimed her, she prayed she had chosen wisely. The days that followed fell into a pattern. They rose at dawn, broke fast with whatever the way station or camp offered, then rode until mid-afternoon, when they would make camp or, if fortunate, find another way station or small settlement for the night. Owen was considerate of her comfort, never pushing her to ride longer than she could manage, always ensuring she had the better accommodations when choices were limited. They talked as they rode, learning each other's histories in the measured pace of long journeys. Rose told Owen of her childhood in Missouri, of her family's westward journey after her father died, of her mother's remarriage to a man who had little use for another man's daughter. She explained how Emmett's courtship had seemed like an escape, a chance at her own home and family. He was different then, she said as they rode through a golden valley dotted with late wildflowers. Or perhaps he just hid his true nature well. He brought me flowers, spoke so sweetly. My mother was eager to see me settled, and I was young enough to mistake attention for love. Owen listened without judgment, occasionally sharing pieces of his own past, in return his upbringing on a small farm in Ohio, his decision to go west after the war, his years working on other men's ranches until he could afford his own land. I was engaged once, he confided as they sat beside a campfire on their 5th night of travel. Back in Ohio before the war, her name was Sarah. We were to be married when I returned from fighting. What happened? Rose asked, watching the play of firelight on his face. She married someone else while I was away, Owen said simply. A man with 2 good legs. He gestured to his left leg, and Rose realized for the first time that he moved with a slight stiffness, especially after a long day's ride. Minier ball at Shiloh, he explained. I was lucky kept the leg, though it pains me in cold weather. I'm sorry, Rose said, both for his injury and his lost love. Owen shrugged. It was a long time ago. Sarah made the practical choice, a merchant who hadn't seen battle, who could provide security. I can't blame her for that. Still, it must have hurt terribly. It did, he acknowledged. But in time I came to see it was for the best. Sarah wanted a certain kind of life, fine dresses, social gatherings, children quickly. I wanted. He gestured to the vast landscape around them. This, freedom, open spaces. Building something with my own hands. Rose nodded, understanding. She had once wanted children quickly too, had dreamed of a house full of little ones. But after experiencing Emmett's cruelty, she had secretly been relieved each month when her courses came, sparing a child from being born to such a father. And now, she asked softly, what do you want now, Owen? He looked at her across the fire, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Peace, he said finally. Contentment. Someone to share the quiet evenings with, someone who sees the beauty in simple things. The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Rose busied herself with her bedroll, and the moment passed. But something had shifted in their relationship, a door opened to possibilities beyond their current arrangement. As they traveled northward, the terrain gradually changed from mountain forests to rolling foothills and finally to the high plains. The air grew cooler, the wind more persistent. Rose's body adapted to the rigors of travel. Her muscles no longer ached quite so badly at day's end, and she found herself enjoying the rhythm of the journey. On the 10th day, they crossed into Wyoming territory. There was no marker, no sign to indicate they had left Colorado behind, but Owen pointed out the change in landscape. "See how the land opens up here," he said, gesturing to the vast expanse before them. "That's Wyoming for you, big sky country." Rose felt a curious sense of relief. Though she knew state lines offered no real protection from Emmett should he choose to pursue her, crossing into Wyoming felt symbolic, as if she were truly leaving her old life behind. "We should reach the ranch in 4 more days," Owen said that evening as they shared a simple meal at a crude table in a tiny settlement consisting of little more than a trading post and a few scattered cabins. "Assuming the weather holds." Rose glanced at the sky where clouds were gathering on the western horizon. "Will it?" Owen frowned. "Hard to say. Those clouds could bring rain or they could pass us by. This time of year is unpredictable." They retired early, each to their separate rooms in the trading post's small attached lodging. Rose lay awake, listening to the rising wind outside. Tomorrow they would be that much closer to Owen's ranch, to the new life she had chosen. What would it be like, living in a remote cabin, seeing no one for days but Owen? Would she grow to care for him as more than her rescuer, her benefactor? Would he expect more from her eventually, despite his assurances? These questions circled in her mind until sleep finally claimed her, bringing dreams of wide prairies and a cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, welcoming her home. Morning brought confirmation of Owen's weather concerns. Rain fell steadily, transforming the trail to mud and reducing visibility to a few hundred yards. After a brief discussion, they decided to delay their departure, hoping the worst would pass by midday. "No sense making the horses struggle through this if we don't have to," Owen reasoned. "Besides, you could use a day of rest. You've been pushing yourself hard, Rose." She couldn't deny the truth of his words. The journey had been taxing, and the prospect of a day without hours in the saddle was appealing. They passed the morning in the trading post's common room, Owen playing checkers with the proprietor while Rose mended a tear in her riding skirt. By afternoon, the rain showed no sign of abating. If anything, it fell harder, driven by a wind that howled around the building's corners. "Looks like we're staying the night," Owen announced, returning from a check on the horses. "The trail north is washing out in places, according to travelers who just arrived from that direction." Rose nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Each day of delay was another day Emmett might be closing the distance between them, if indeed he was following. Though Owen insisted they had left no clear trail, Rose couldn't shake the fear that her husband's rage would drive him to find her, no matter how far she fled. "Rose," Owen said, sitting beside her on the rough bench, "what's troubling you? Besides the weather, I mean." She hesitated, then admitted, "I keep wondering if Emmett is looking for me, if he might find us before we reach your ranch." Owen's expression grew serious. "Do you think he would come after you?" "I don't know," Rose said honestly. "His pride would demand it, but his laziness might prevail. Emmett doesn't like to be inconvenienced, and tracking me across Wyoming would certainly be that." "Well, if he does come," Owen said, his voice low and determined, "he'll find I'm not a man who gives up what he values without a fight." The possessive note in his voice should have alarmed Rose, reminding her too much of Emmett's claims of ownership. Instead, she found it reassuring not because Owen was claiming her, but because he was promising to protect her choice, her freedom to decide her own path. "Thank you," she said simply, placing her hand briefly over his. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, forcing them to remain at the trading post for a second night. Rose grew restless, pacing the small common room and peering out at the relentless rain. By the third morning, the rain had finally stopped, though the sky remained overcast. "We can travel today," Owen announced after checking the condition of the trail. "It'll be slow going through the mud, but passable. We've lost time, but we can make some of it up if you're willing to ride a bit longer each day." Rose was more than willing. The enforced delay had only increased her anxiety to reach the safety of Owen's ranch. They set out mid-morning, the horses' hooves squelching in the mud, their progress indeed slower than before the storm. The next 3 days were grueling. The trail alternated between muddy stretches that exhausted the horses and rocky passages that jarred Rose's bones. They pushed on longer each day, making camp only when the light failed completely, rising before dawn to continue. On the afternoon of the 14th day since leaving Georgetown, Owen reined in his horse atop a low rise and waited for Rose to join him. When she did, he gestured to the panorama before them. "There it is," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Ingram Ranch." Rose followed his gaze across a broad valley cut by a winding creek. On the far side, nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills, stood a cabin with several outbuildings. Even from this distance, she could see cattle grazing on the lush grass of the valley floor. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. After 2 weeks of constant travel and anxiety, the sight of their destination filled her with overwhelming relief. "Owen, it's perfect," he smiled, pleased by her reaction. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads further south, but it's mine. Every acre, every head of cattle, every board in that cabin I worked for it, built it with my own hands." "That makes it all the more valuable," Rose said, understanding the pride of creation, of ownership earned through labor. They rode down into the valley, crossing the creek at a shallow ford. As they approached the cabin, Rose noted details she couldn't see from a distance: the neat vegetable garden to one side, the chopping block with neatly stacked firewood, the rocking chair on the small porch. Someone had cared for this place in Owen's absence. "My ranch hand, Tom Wilkes, looks after things when I'm gone," Owen explained, noticing her questioning glance. "He lives in that smaller cabin over there." He pointed to a structure partially hidden behind a stand of cottonwoods. "Good man, Tom, quiet, keeps to himself mostly. You'll meet him at supper. He always checks in when he sees I'm back." They dismounted in front of the main cabin. Rose's legs trembled after the long ride, and she steadied herself against her horse's flank. Owen was immediately at her side, his hand under her elbow. "Easy now," he said gently. "You've ridden far today. Let's get you inside to rest." The interior of the cabin was simple but clean: one main room with a stone fireplace, a solid table with 4 chairs, a dresser, and a curtained-off sleeping area. A door led to what Owen explained was a second small bedroom, currently used for storage. "That would be your room," he said, a slight flush coloring his tanned face. "Once we clear it out and make it proper for you. For tonight you can take my bed and I'll bunk with Tom." "I couldn't put you out of your own bed," Rose protested. "I've slept in worse conditions these past 2 weeks. I can make a pallet by the fire." Owen shook his head firmly. "Not after the journey you've had. Please, Rose, allow me this courtesy." Seeing he wouldn't be dissuaded, Rose relented. Owen brought in her bundle and placed it on the bed, then excused himself to tend to the horses. Left alone, Rose explored her new surroundings more thoroughly. The cabin was undeniably a bachelor's dwelling, functional rather than decorated, with few concessions to comfort beyond the necessities. Yet it was clean and solid, the craftsmanship evident in the tight-fitting logs and the smooth plank floor. It could become a home, she thought. With curtains at the windows, a quilt on the bed, flowers in a vase on the table, it could be truly welcoming. She was surprised by her own thoughts. Was she already planning to stay permanently? To make this her home? It seemed presumptuous, given the tentative nature of her arrangement with Owen. Yet he had invited her here, had spoken of the second bedroom as her room. Rose unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on pegs along the wall and placing her precious tin box beneath the bed for safekeeping. Then, despite her fatigue, she set about preparing a meal from the provisions Owen kept stocked. When Owen returned with Tom Wilkes in tow, they found her at the stove, stirring a pot of beans with salt pork and molasses, corn bread baking in the Dutch oven nestled in the coals. "Something smells mighty fine," Tom said after Owen had introduced them. He was a lean, weathered man of indeterminate age, anywhere from 40 to 60. Rose guessed with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "It's just a simple supper," Rose said, suddenly self-conscious. "I had to work with what was available." "Which is more than either of us would have done," Owen assured her. "Tom and I would have opened a can of beans and called it a meal." Tom nodded agreement. The boss man never was much of a cook. Cattle drive beans, that's about his specialty. The meal was simple but satisfying. Rose found herself relaxing as the two men discussed ranch business, the condition of the herd, repairs needed on the north fence line, preparations for winter. There was something soothing about their practical concerns after 2 weeks of uncertainty and travel. After supper, Tom excused himself to return to his cabin, tactfully giving them privacy. Owen helped Rose clear the dishes, then they sat before the fire, the familiar routine of their evenings on the trail continuing in this new setting. "Are you comfortable here?" Owen asked after a companionable silence. "I know it's very different from town living." "It's peaceful," Rose said truthfully. "After Georgetown, after Emmett." She shook her head. "I never realized how tense I was all the time, always bracing for his next outburst. Here I can breathe." Owen's expression softened. "You can stay as long as you need, Rose. Forever if you want." The implication hung in the air between them. Rose chose her words carefully. "That's generous of you, Owen, but we both know I'm still legally bound to Emmett. And even if I weren't, we barely know each other." "I know enough," Owen said, echoing his words from their first serious conversation. "I know you're kind and brave. I know you cook like no one I've ever met. I know you deserve to be cherished, not abused." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "The rest we can learn in time." Rose felt tears pricking at her eyes. "What are you saying, Owen?" "I'm saying I care for you, Rose Adams. More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances. But I do. And I'm willing to wait for divorce papers, for you to heal from what Emmett did to you, for however long it takes, if there's any chance you might someday feel for me what I'm beginning to feel for you." The honesty of his declaration touched Rose deeply. Here was a man laying his heart bare, asking not for possession but for possibility. "I care for you too, Owen," she admitted softly. "You've shown me kindness when I'd forgotten such a thing existed, but I need time. Time to understand who I am away from Emmett, what I want for my future." Owen nodded, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "Time is something we have plenty of out here," he said with a smile. "Now you should rest. Tomorrow will be busy. I need to check the entire property after being gone so long, and you'll want to make this place more comfortable for yourself." Rose retired to Owen's bed, surrounded by his scent in the blankets, leather, pine, and something uniquely him. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive as she replayed their conversation. Owen cared for her. Owen was willing to wait. Owen saw her as worthy of cherishing. The contrast with Emmett couldn't have been more stark. Where Emmett had demanded, Owen offered. Where Emmett had belittled, Owen praised. Where Emmett had taken, Owen gave. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Rose allowed herself to imagine a future here, cooking meals in this kitchen, tending a larger garden, perhaps even helping with the ranch work. It was a vision of life so different from what she had known in Georgetown that it seemed almost like a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was a possibility, one she had been brave enough to reach for when she rode away from her old life 14 days ago. The next few weeks settled into a routine that surprised Rose with its comfort and simplicity. Owen and Tom worked the ranch from dawn until dusk, moving cattle to fresh grazing areas, repairing fences, and preparing for the coming winter. Rose took charge of the cabin, transforming it from a bachelor's quarters to a proper home. Owen insisted she use some of his savings to order fabric, dishes, and other household items from the dry goods store in Laramie. "The place needs a woman's touch," he said when she protested the expense. "And it gives you something that's yours, that you've chosen." Choice, that was the gift Owen gave her daily. Choice in how she arranged the cabin, what she cooked, how she spent her time. After years of Emmett's control, these simple freedoms felt like luxuries. The second bedroom was cleared out and furnished with a bed, a small dresser, and a rag rug. Rose braided herself from fabric scraps. Though it became officially her room, Rose found herself spending most evenings in the main room with Owen, talking by the fire, playing checkers, or simply enjoying companionable silence as she mended and he whittled. As October gave way to November, the weather turned colder. The first snow dusted the higher elevations, a reminder that winter in Wyoming was a serious matter. Owen spent long days ensuring the ranch was prepared, extra hay stacked for the cattle, firewood split and stacked to the eaves of the lean-to, preserves and dried goods stocked in the root cellar. "Winter can isolate us for weeks at a time," he explained as they inventoried supplies one evening. "We need to be self-sufficient." The "we" warmed Rose more than the fire crackling in the hearth. Over the weeks, something had shifted between them, a deepening of trust, a growing affection that manifested in small ways. Owen's hand lingering on her shoulder as he passed her chair. Rose preparing his favorite meals without being asked. Shared laughter over Tom's dry observations about the stubbornness of certain cattle. They had not spoken again of feelings or future since that first night. But Rose was increasingly certain that her future lay here, with this quiet, honorable man who had rescued her from a life of misery. Then, on a crisp November afternoon, as Rose hung laundry to dry in the cold sunshine, a rider appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Even at a distance, something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the weather. She watched, frozen, as the rider descended toward the cabin. As he drew closer, her worst fears were confirmed. It was Emmett. Rose dropped the sheet she had been hanging and ran toward the main pasture where Owen and Tom were working with the cattle. She had to warn them, had to reach Owen before Emmett did, but she was too late. Emmett intercepted her halfway, his horse cutting across her path. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his face twisted with rage and the effects of hard travel. "Well, well," he drawled, grabbing her arm before she could dart away. "If it isn't my loving wife, thought you'd run off with your cowboy lover, did you?" "Let go of me, Emmett," Rose demanded, trying to pull free. "You're hurting me." "Hurting you?" he laughed, the sound harsh and without humor. "You haven't begun to feel hurt yet, Rose. You humiliated me, made me a laughingstock in Georgetown. Poor Emmett Adams, his wife ran off with that drifting cowboy. You know what that feels like." "I didn't run off with him," Rose said, still struggling against his grip. I ran away from you. From your cruelty, your drinking, your fists. Emmett's face darkened further. You're my wife, he hissed. Mine by law and by God. You took vows, Rose. Vows that you broke every time you struck me, she countered, finding courage in her anger. Every time you mocked and belittled me. Every time you spent our money on whiskey while I went hungry. You ungrateful. Emmett raised his hand to strike her, but a voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Take your hands off her. Owen stood 20 paces away, his rifle leveled at Emmett's chest. Tom flanked him, similarly armed. Emmett's hand froze mid-air. Slowly he lowered it and turned to face the men, keeping his grip on Rose's arm. This is between me and my wife, he said, his voice deceptively calm. This doesn't concern you. Anything that happens on my land concerns me, Owen replied, his voice steady. And Rose is under my protection now. Emmett's laugh was ugly. Protection? Is that what you call stealing another man's wife? Where I come from, that makes you a thief and her a whore. The last word had barely left his lips when Owen closed the distance between them with surprising speed. Before Emmett could react, Owen's rifle butt connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. Rose stumbled back as Emmett's grip loosened, and Tom was immediately beside her, pulling her to safety. Emmett spat blood onto the dirt and glared up at Owen. You'll hang for this, he threatened. Assaulting a man on his own property. This is my property, Owen interrupted. And you're trespassing. As for Rose, she came with me of her own free will to escape your abuse. She's my wife, Emmett insisted, struggling to his feet. The law says a lot of things, Owen cut in again. But out here we have our own justice. Now you have two choices, Adams. You can get back on your horse and ride away, never to darken our door again. Or you can try to take Rose by force, in which case. He gestured toward Tom, who had his rifle trained on Emmett's chest. Rose watched the calculation in Emmett's eyes. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and they both knew it. But Emmett's pride had always been his weakness. This isn't over, he said finally, backing toward his horse. I'll be back with the law. You can't keep what's legally mine. She's not a possession, Owen said quietly, dangerously. She's a person who deserves better than you ever gave her. Emmett swung himself into the saddle, his eyes fixed on Rose with a hatred that made her shiver. You'll regret this, he promised. Both of you. Then he wheeled his horse and galloped away, dust rising in his wake. The three of them stood watching until he disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Rose realize she was shaking. Owen was immediately at her side, his arm around her shoulders. Are you all right? He asked, his voice gentle now, all traces of the hard man who had confronted Emmett gone. He found me, Rose whispered, the reality of it still sinking in. How did he find me? Not hard to track two riders heading north from Georgetown, Tom observed pragmatically. Especially if he was asking questions along the way. Owen led Rose back to the cabin, settling her in a chair by the fire while Tom kept watch outside, alert for Emmett's return. He won't give up, Rose said, accepting the cup of tea Owen pressed into her hands. You heard him. He'll go to the law. Owen sat across from her, his expression grave but determined. Rose, listen to me. I won't let him take you back, not if you don't want to go. But he's right about the law, she said, the warm safety she had felt on the ranch evaporating like morning dew. I'm still his wife. He has rights over me. The law is one thing, Owen said. Justice is another. No judge I know would force a woman back to a man who beats her. He leaned forward, taking her hands in his. But if you want to go back to him, if that's your choice, I won't stop you. Rose stared at him, stunned. You think I want to go back to him? No, Owen said softly. But I need you to know that you have a choice. Always. Tears filled Rose's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude, not fear. "I choose to stay," she said firmly. "I choose you, Owen. I choose this life we're building." Relief flooded his face, followed by a determination that set his jaw. "Then we'll face whatever comes together," he promised, "including Emmett Adams and any law he brings with him." True to his word, Emmett returned 3 days later with the county sheriff, a paunchy man named Biggs who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Mr. Ingram," Sheriff Biggs said as Owen met them in the yard, Rose standing resolute beside him. "I've got a complaint here from Mr. Adams that you've abducted his wife. That's a serious charge." "I abducted no one," Owen replied evenly. "Mrs. Adams came with me willingly to escape her husband's abuse." He nodded toward Rose. "Ask her yourself." Sheriff Biggs turned to Rose, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. "Madam, is this true? Did you leave your husband of your own accord?" "I did," Rose stated clearly. "My husband beat me regularly, Sheriff. He drank away our money and mocked me constantly. I left to save myself." Emmett's face contorted with rage. "She's lying," he spat. "She ran off with her lover while I was working honest hours in the mine. She's nothing but a—" "That's enough," Sheriff Biggs interrupted, raising a hand. "Mrs. Adams, while I sympathize with your situation, the law is clear. A wife belongs with her husband unless a court says otherwise." "She's not going anywhere with him," Owen said, his voice dangerously quiet. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip, not a threat, but a statement. The sheriff sighed heavily. "Look, folks, I don't want bloodshed here. The law may say one thing, but I've seen enough battered wives to know there's usually fire where there's smoke." He turned to Emmett. "Mr. Adams, my advice to you is to file for divorce on grounds of abandonment and be done with it. Dragging a woman back against her won't make for a happy home." "Divorce?" Emmett looked incredulous. "And let her get away with this?" "Never." "Then we're at an impasse," Sheriff Biggs said. "Because I won't force Mrs. Adams to return with you, not without a direct court order, and even then—" He let the implication hang in the air. Emmett's face darkened further. "You're taking their side. I rode all this way for justice, and you're siding with the adulterers." "I'm not siding with anyone," the sheriff replied wearily. "I'm trying to prevent more trouble than we already have." He looked at Owen. "Mr. Ingram, I'd appreciate it if Mrs. Adams would consider filing for divorce herself. It would clear up this situation legally." Owen looked to Rose, leaving the decision to her. She nodded slowly. "I will, Sheriff, as soon as possible." "Good," Sheriff Biggs said, relieved. "Mr. Adams, I suggest you return to Colorado. When the divorce is finalized, you'll be notified." Emmett stared at them all with naked hatred. "This isn't over," he said, the same words he had used days earlier. "Not by a long shot." He mounted his horse and rode away without another word, not even waiting for the sheriff. Sheriff Biggs watched him go, then turned back to Owen and Rose. "Be careful," he warned. "Men like that, when they feel humiliated, they can be dangerous." "We'll be vigilant," Owen assured him. "Thank you, Sheriff." After the lawman departed, Rose and Owen returned to the cabin in silence, both processing the confrontation and its implications. "I'm sorry," Rose said finally as they sat at the table. "I've brought this trouble to your door." Owen reached across the table to take her hand. "Don't apologize for seeking a better life, Rose. Emmett is the one who should be sorry for how he treated you, sorry for following you here, sorry for trying to control you still." "Do you think he'll really leave?" Rose asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Or will he try something else?" Owen's expression was grim. "I don't know. But Tom and I will take turns keeping watch for a while, just to be safe." That night, Rose lay awake in her bed, listening to the wind whistling through the eaves and Owen's quiet movements as he checked the doors and windows before taking the first watch. Despite the tension of Emmett's visit, she felt strangely at peace. For the first time in her life, someone was protecting her not out of obligation or ownership, but out of genuine care. The realization brought with it another. She loved Owen Ingram. The feeling had been growing slowly, nurtured by his constant kindness, his respect for her choices, his quiet strength. Now, faced with the possibility of losing everything they had begun to build together, she could no longer deny the truth of her heart. Morning brought heavy snow, the first significant storm of the season. Owen returned from checking the cattle, stamping snow from his boots and bringing a blast of cold air with him. "Storms setting in," he reported, warming his hands by the fire. "Could last for days, according to Tom's knee." He smiled at the reference to the ranch hand's weather predictions, which were based on his old war injury but proved remarkably accurate. "Is that good or bad?" Rose asked, pouring him a cup of hot coffee. "Good for us, bad for anyone trying to travel," Owen replied, understanding her real question. "If Emmett's still in the area, he won't be going anywhere until this passes. But neither will he be coming here. The trail would be impossible to navigate in this weather." The storm lasted 4 days, blanketing the ranch in 3 feet of snow and effectively cutting them off from the outside world. For Rose, it was a reprieve, a chance to temporarily forget Emmett's threats and focus on the daily rhythms of ranch life in winter. She and Owen settled into a companionable routine. Mornings were for necessary chores: feeding livestock, clearing paths between buildings, maintaining the fires that kept the cabin warm. Afternoons, when the short winter daylight was at its brightest, Owen and Tom would check on the cattle in the sheltered valley where the herd weathered the winter. Evenings were Rose's favorite time. The 3 of them would share dinner, hearty stews and soups she prepared, supplemented by biscuits or corn bread, and then Tom would return to his cabin, leaving Rose and Owen to their fireside conversations. It was during one such evening, as a particularly fierce gust of wind rattled the shutters, that Rose found the courage to speak what was in her heart. "Owen," she began, setting aside her mending, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from the bridle he was repairing, his expression attentive. "What is it, Rose? These past months with you?" She took a deep breath, gathering her resolve. "They've shown me what life should be between a man and a woman. You've treated me with respect and kindness. You've given me choices when Emmett only gave demands." Owen set the bridle aside, giving her his full attention. "You deserve nothing less," he said simply. "The thing is," Rose continued, her heart pounding, "I've come to care for you, more than care, if I'm being completely honest." She met his gaze steadily. "I love you, Owen Ingram. I know it's complicated. I'm still legally married. Emmett is still a threat, but I needed you to know." Owen's face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. He crossed the small space between them and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Rose Adams," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I have loved you since that day by Clear Creek when you stood so brave and determined, ready to change your life. I loved you through our journey here. I loved you as I watched you transform this cabin into a home. And I will love you through whatever lies ahead, be it divorce proceedings or Emmett's threats or 50 years of Wyoming winters." Rose felt tears spill down her cheeks, tears of happiness, of relief, of wonder that this good man could love her so completely. "May I kiss you?" Owen asked, always respectful of her boundaries. Even now, in answer, Rose leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as they both gave themselves to it. When they finally parted, Rose felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, a final healing of wounds Emmett had inflicted, a blossoming of hope she had thought long dead. "When my divorce is final," she whispered, still close enough to feel his breath on her face, "I want to be your wife, Owen, if you'll have me." His smile was radiant. "Nothing would make me happier," he assured her, "but until then we'll be careful proper. I won't have anyone, especially Emmett, claiming dishonor on your part." Rose nodded, appreciating his concern for her reputation even in this remote place where conventional society seemed far away. The days that followed were filled with a new sweetness as their love, now acknowledged, colored every interaction. Owen was true to his word about propriety, their physical affection limited to brief kisses and held hands, but the promise of more, of a future together, suffused their days with joy. When the storm finally passed, leaving the ranch in a pristine white landscape under brilliant blue skies, Owen rode to Laramie to post Rose's divorce petition and collect mail and supplies. He returned with news that quickened her pulse with anxiety. "Emmett's still in the territory," he reported grimly as they unpacked the supplies. "Sheriff Biggs says he's taken a room at the saloon in Laramie, telling anyone who'll listen how his wife was stolen from him." Rose's hand stilled on the package of sugar she was holding. "He's waiting for the divorce to be denied," she realized. "He thinks if he contests it, the court will side with him." "Possibly," Owen agreed. "But Sheriff Biggs also thinks he's working up his courage for something else. He's drinking heavily, Rose, making threats." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold ran through her. "He's going to try to take me back by force," she said, voicing her deepest fear. "Or worse." Owen's expression was resolute. "He'll have to go through me first," he promised. "And Tom, we won't let him harm you, Rose." Despite his reassurance, Rose found her hard-won peace shattered. She jumped at every sound outside the cabin, peered anxiously through the windows whenever she heard a horse approach. Owen and Tom maintained their vigilance, never leaving her alone, always armed when they worked outside. December arrived, bringing Christmas preparations that provided some distraction from their concerns. Rose baked cookies and pies, using precious supplies of sugar and dried fruit. She and Owen cut a small pine tree from the hillside and set it up in the cabin, decorating it with strings of dried berries and paper ornaments they crafted together in the evenings. "My mother always said Christmas is for new beginnings," Rose told Owen as they sat admiring their handiwork one evening. "I think this will be our first Christmas together, the start of our life together." Owen squeezed her hand. "The first of many," he agreed. They planned a Christmas dinner with Tom, exchanged small gifts. They had prepared in secret a knitted scarf from Rose to Owen, a delicately carved wooden rose from him to her. For a few precious days, the specter of Emmett receded, allowing them to simply be two people in love, looking forward to a shared future. Then, 3 days after Christmas, as Rose was gathering eggs from the henhouse while Owen and Tom mended a break in the fence line caused by the weight of snow, she heard a horse approaching. Thinking it was Owen returning early, she stepped out of the henhouse with a smile that froze on her face when she saw who rode into the yard. Emmett looked terrible gaunt, unshaven, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He dismounted unsteadily, and Rose could smell the whiskey on him even from several paces away. "There you are," he slurred, taking a stumbling step toward her. "My loving wife." Rose backed away, clutching the basket of eggs as if it might somehow protect her. "Emmett, you shouldn't be here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Owen and Tom are just over the hill. They'll be back any minute." "Good," Emmett said with an ugly laugh. "I want that thieving cowboy to see this." He drew a pistol from his coat, aiming it at her with a hand that trembled from drink and rage. "You're coming with me, Rose. Now." Rose felt a curious calm descend over her, the same calm she had felt the day she decided to leave Georgetown with Owen. "No, Emmett," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere with you." His face twisted with fury. "You don't get to say no to me," he snarled. "You're my wife." "Mine." "Not for much longer," Rose replied, standing her ground despite the weapon pointed at her heart. "The divorce will be final soon, and then I'll be free of you forever." "There won't be any divorce," Emmett spat. "You'll either come with me now or you'll die right here. Either way, your cowboy loses." Rose realized with sudden clarity that Emmett didn't truly want her back. He wanted to punish her, to reassert control, to wound Owen by taking what he valued most. It was pride, not love, that drove him. "If you shoot me," she said with remarkable steadiness, "Owen will hunt you down. You know that, don't you? He'll follow you to the ends of the earth." Doubt flickered briefly in Emmett's bloodshot eyes, but it was quickly replaced by drunken resolve. "Then let him," he declared, cocking the pistol. "At least he won't have you. Put down the gun, Adams." Owen's voice cut through the tense air. He stood at the edge of the yard, his rifle leveled at Emmett, Tom slightly behind him with his own weapon ready. Emmett's reaction was immediate and reckless. He grabbed Rose, pulling her against him as a shield, the pistol now pressed to her temple. "Stay back," he shouted, "or I'll shoot her right now." Rose could feel Emmett's heart pounding against her back, could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. She met Owen's gaze across the yard, saw the fear in his eyes, fear for her, but also calculation. He was looking for an opening, a way to end this without her getting hurt. "Let's all calm down," Owen said, his voice measured despite the tension evident in every line of his body. "Emmett, you don't want to do this. Murder will get you hanged." "She's my wife," Emmett insisted, the gun pressing painfully against Rose's head. "A man can't murder what belongs to him." "She doesn't belong to you or anyone else," Owen replied, taking a cautious step forward. "Rose is her own person, free to choose her own path." Emmett laughed harshly. "Free? Women aren't free. They need guidance, discipline. My Rose forgot that, but I'll remind her." The arm around Rose's waist tightened painfully. "We're leaving now. You try to stop us, she dies." Rose felt something shift inside her, a refusal to be a passive participant in her own fate. Emmett's grip was tight, but his stance was unsteady from drink. If she could create just a moment's distraction. Her eyes locked with Owen's, trying to communicate her intent. Then, with all her strength, she slammed her heel down on Emmett's instep, while simultaneously dropping the basket of eggs she still clutched. Emmett howled in pain and surprise, his grip loosening just enough for Rose to tear herself free. She dove to the ground as Owen's rifle cracked, the sound echoing across the snow-covered ranch. Emmett staggered backward, a look of disbelief spreading across his face as his hand went to his chest, coming away red with blood. "You shot me," he said, sounding more surprised than anything else. Then he collapsed to the snow, his blood staining the pristine white surface. The next moments were a blur. Owen was beside her, checking her for injuries, his hands gentle but urgent. Tom knelt by Emmett, feeling for a pulse, then shook his head grimly. "He's gone," the ranch hand reported, standing with a weary sigh. "Clean shot through the heart." Rose stared at Emmett's still form, a tangle of emotions surging through her: relief, horror, guilt, and beneath it all, a profound sadness for the man he had become and the life that had ended this way. "It was self-defense," Owen said quietly, helping Rose to her feet. "He would have killed you, then me." "I know," she whispered, leaning against him for support as reaction set in, making her legs tremble. "I know." Tom took charge practically. "I'll ride for the sheriff," he said. "Better to report this right away. You get her inside, warm her up." This wasn't murder, it was protecting your own. As Owen led her toward the cabin, Rose looked back once at the man who had been her husband. Despite everything, she whispered a brief prayer for his soul. Then she allowed Owen to guide her inside, away from death and toward the promise of their future. Sheriff Biggs arrived the next day, accompanied by the county coroner. After taking statements from all three of them and examining the scene, he declared the shooting justified self-defense. "Adams came onto your property armed, threatened Mrs. Adams with a gun, and used her as a shield," the sheriff summarized. "Mr. Ingram acted to protect her life. No jury in Wyoming would convict him. Emmett was buried in the Laramie Cemetery, a simple marker all he received." Rose did not attend the burial, but she arranged for a minister to say prayers over his grave. Despite his cruelty, she could not forget that he had once been the young man who courted her with flowers and sweet words. The divorce petition was withdrawn as unnecessary. Widowhood had freed Rose more completely than any court decree could have. Yet the manner of that freedom cast a temporary shadow over her and Owen's happiness. "I killed a man," Owen said one night as they sat by the fire, the first snow of the new year falling gently outside. "Your husband. However justified, that's a weight between us." Rose took his hand, her touch conveying what words could not. "Emmett stopped being my husband in any true sense long ago," she said softly. "What you did was protect me, protect us and our future." She hesitated, then added, "I won't pretend I don't sometimes feel sorrow for how it ended, for the man Emmett might have been in another life. But I don't blame you, Owen. Never think that." Owen's expression lightened somewhat, though she knew it would take time for him to fully reconcile himself to having taken a life, even in defense of hers. As January turned to February, and February to March, the incident gradually receded in their daily thoughts, allowing joy to return. With Rose now legally free, they began to plan their wedding for the spring, when the mountain passes would be clear enough for Rose's mother and stepfather to travel from Colorado for the ceremony. One evening in early April, as the first wildflowers began to appear in sheltered corners of the ranch, Owen and Rose walked along the creek that gave life to the valley. The air was crisp, but held the promise of warming days ahead. "A year ago," Rose mused, "I was trapped in a life I thought would never change. I believed I deserved Emmett's cruelty somehow, that it was my failure as a wife that provoked his anger." Owen squeezed her hand gently. "And now?" She smiled up at him, her face radiant in the golden light of sunset. "Now I know better. I know that love doesn't hurt or demean, it doesn't mock or belittle." She stopped walking to face him fully. "Love is what you've shown me, Owen, respect, kindness, partnership." Owen cupped her face in his calloused hands. "You taught me about love too, Rose, watching your courage, your resilience. You amazed me from the start. That first night in Georgetown when you served me the best meal I'd ever had despite Emmett's cruelty, I knew you were extraordinary." Rose laughed softly. "It was just rabbit stew." "It was more than that," Owen insisted. "It was care and skill and dignity, even in the face of disrespect. That stew represented everything good about you, everything Emmett was too blind to see." He drew her close, kissing her with a tenderness that still made her heart race after all these months. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. 10 more days," he murmured. 10 days until you're officially Mrs. Rose Ingram." "I can hardly wait," she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, the ranch at its spring finest with green grass carpeting the valley and wildflowers dotting the hillsides. Rose's mother and stepfather had arrived 2 days earlier, along with a handful of neighbors from surrounding ranches and a few townspeople from Laramie who had come to know and respect Owen over the years. Tom had outdone himself preparing the ranch for the celebration, even constructing a small arbor where the ceremony would take place, overlooking the creek and the valley beyond. The neighboring women had brought dishes to supplement Rose's cooking, creating a feast that would be served on tables set up in the yard. In the small bedroom that would soon no longer be just hers, Rose dressed with her mother's help. Her wedding dress was simple but lovely pale blue cotton with white lace trim that she had ordered specially from Denver. "You look beautiful," her mother said, adjusting the wildflower crown that served as Rose's veil. "And happy. That's all I ever wanted for you, Rose, happiness." Rose embraced her mother tightly. "I am happy, Mama, happier than I ever dreamed possible." When she stepped outside to walk toward the arbor where Owen and the minister waited, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the assembled guests. But Rose had eyes only for Owen, tall and handsome in his best shirt and polished boots, his face alight with love as he watched her approach. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear, promises of love, respect, and partnership that Rose knew they would both honor. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was both tender and passionate, a perfect balance that symbolized everything about their relationship. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing under the stars. As Rose and Owen took a moment apart from their guests, standing at the edge of the firelight, she leaned against his strong shoulder with a contented sigh. "Mrs. Rose Ingram," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "I think it suits me." "It surely does," Owen agreed, his arm secure around her waist. "Though I fell in love with Rose Adams, the woman whose cooking changed my life and my heart in one evening." Rose laughed softly. "All from a simple rabbit stew." "The best meal I ever had," Owen insisted with a smile, "until the next one you cooked and the next. Each better than the last, just like our days together will be." As they rejoined their guests for the final dances of the evening, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From Georgetown to Wyoming, from fear to courage, from a husband who mocked her to one who cherished her, it had been a journey of both miles and spirit. She had found not just safety with Owen, but partnership, respect, and deep, abiding love. In leaving behind the prison of her first marriage, she had discovered the freedom to be herself fully, to cook meals that were appreciated, to create a home filled with warmth, to love and be loved without fear or shame. As the years passed, the Ingram Ranch prospered. Owen and Rose welcomed 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter who grew strong in the clear Wyoming air, learning the values of hard work, honesty, and respect from parents who exemplified these qualities daily. Rose's cooking became legendary in the region. Travelers passing through would go miles out of their way to stop at the Ingram Ranch, hoping for a meal at her table. She eventually compiled her recipes into a small book that was published in Laramie, bringing her modest fame and the satisfaction of sharing her gift with others. On their 20th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house that had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, Owen presented Rose with a special gift, a silver serving ladle, engraved with the words, "The best meal I ever had," and the date they first met. "To remind you," he said as she traced the inscription with her finger, "that sometimes life's greatest blessings come from the most unexpected moments." Rose smiled at her husband, the years having only deepened her love for this good man who had recognized her worth when she herself had forgotten it. Like a hungry cowboy stopping for a meal at the wrong house. Exactly, Owen agreed, taking her hand in his. Though I'd say it was precisely the right house, at precisely the right moment. As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, they sat together in companionable silence, surrounded by the life they had built together, a life founded on respect, nurture, and love, ingredients far more essential than any found in Rose's famous stews. In the simple act of appreciating a meal when another had mocked it, Owen had offered Rose a glimpse of what love could be. And in the courage to reach for that possibility, Rose had found her true home and the man who would cherish her always.